Hello, my dear friends, and welcome to another episode. What I will be discussing today are the results of the elections in Germany. There were state elections in two German states, and of course, there was a big uproar after the results were announced because the parties that made the largest gains were the AfD, Alternative für Deutschland, and the BSW, the Bündnis Wagenknecht. Why is that so controversial? And why did the establishment, so-called liberal media, sprung up to call for panic and distress and all of these things? Well, because both of these parties are against the war in Ukraine. They are against the proxy war that NATO is leading in Ukraine against Russia. They are against the green policies that have turned Germany from Europe's best performing economy to Europe's sick man, just like the Ottoman Empire was in the 19th century. Now, Germany is the sick man of Europe. It is continuing to deindustrialize, not only because it has decided to stop purchasing gas from Russia, which it still does, but pipeline gas was the cheapest. Now it has to buy gas on the spot market, which is a more expensive alternative. A lot of that still comes from Russia, and of course there's this indirect pipeline gas which comes through Ukraine. But anyway, so it's not just because Germany abandoned gas from Russia, which was its main competitiveness driver. It was what fueled the German economy and made it price competitive with China, so to say. It's not only just because it abandoned that, but also because it abandoned nuclear power, also at the behest of the Green Party, this instrument of the United States to collapse Germany, basically. And it also started to impose all sorts of drastic carbon cutting measures and replacement of fossil fuel generating uh, fossil fuel consuming engines with electric ones in all sorts of areas, even in domestic heating and so on. So overall, the Green Party, which is it is in the coalition government and which managed to win no seats in these two states in eastern Germany where the elections happened in Thüringen and in Sachsen. The Green Party agenda became the mainstream agenda for both the center right and the center left and the liberals. Everybody basically towed the green Atlanticist line and worked to deindustrialize Germany. And therefore, this was, of course, a protest vote. But it's not just that. It's not just because of economic interests that more and more German voters want to choose non-systemic parties and vote for these um, newly established parties which are not part of the coalition government and have never been part of any government so far. It's not just for these pragmatic economic reasons. It's also for safety reasons, because both of these parties oppose the stationing of long-range nuclear weapons directed at Russia on German soil. So the Greens, which were actually formed in the 1970s in the hippie movement as a peace party, as opposed to military involvement in the Cold War and in America's proxy wars, denouncing the nuclear threat, the threat of nuclear annihilation. It has morphed into the exact opposite. Now it is against nuclear power stations, but it is not against the stationing of nuclear weapons, of American nuclear weapons on German soil. On the contrary, it is very much pro. It is the most Atlanticist party, and it is the party that most wants to militarize Germany, that wants to increase the military spending and so on. And of course, yeah, there is an electorate, especially in East Germany, where these two states are, Thüringen and Sachsen. There is this German electorate Coincidentally, it is in Eastern Germany, not because of what the Western narrative says, that because in Eastern Germany they did not do denazification, and this is why in Eastern Germany the far right movements were conserved and sprung up after 1990, after the reunification. No, it's the exact opposite. In West Germany, the denazification was very, very superficial, very shallow, and the majority of the high ranking Wehrmacht officers became NATO officers. One of them even led NATO, the NATO military command. And in East Germany, it was the exact opposite. The party that took power was the party that was persecuted under the Third Reich, and they developed their own consciousness, very, very, very different from the Western one. And not only that, but they're also impervious to bullshit. Just because they had the Stasi, they had the propaganda, they had Honecker, this whole state apparatus of repression, of speech repression, they have the antibodies to recognize it when it happens again. And it is not coincidental that in Eastern Germany they had the lowest vaccination rates. Of course, Western propaganda says that this is a cause of the fact that they're stupid, that communism basically uh, dropped their IQ points by 20, and now they're all retarded and they cannot grasp basic science. This is how the narrative went during the vaccine crusade in 2021. Then, when the majority of the people in Eastern Germany opposed the military involvements into the war in Ukraine, the Western propaganda machine also painted that as, of course, they're so retarded, those in the East, because they were under communism for so long that they were brainwashed, and now they do not understand the basic arguments why a war is necessary, why it is necessary to defeat Russia, and so on and so forth. But this is actually not the point. I see two more important arguments in the fact that, on the one hand, the East German population, because it was part of the Warsaw Pact and it had Soviet troops stationed there and so on and so forth. It should be the most Russophobe, you would say, right? If the Russians are as they are painted by the American propaganda, these brutes, these savages, they raped these Germans for 45 years under the occupation. Of course, all these Germans should be completely appalled by the Russians and should be very eager to support any kind of war against Russia. But this is exactly the opposite, right? So on the one hand, I would say that just because the German propaganda machine is so strong and dissent is criminalized, people are thrown in prison for stuff they write on Facebook and so on and so forth, just like the Western media machine portrays Russia to be. So yeah, because Germany has turned into this censorship state where you have to practice double speech, you have to say one thing in private and another thing in public. You have to say the acceptable line, otherwise you'll get cancelled, fired, or imprisoned. Because Germany has become this police state, which is highly reminiscent of what the East German state was before 1990. This is why a majority of East Germans have chosen non-systemic parties. The AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, which is the so-called far-right party, came in first and close second in these two state legislatures, while the Bündnisser Wagenknecht, considered a far left party, became the third party in these state parliaments. So yeah, this would be one reason, because Germany, the Federal Republic of Germany, is highly reminiscent, is becoming more and more reminiscent of the German Democratic Republic before 1990, which is, by the way, also illegal to say in Germany. So in Germany they have this Office for the Protection of Constitution, which polices speech and polices political attitudes and closes down magazines and basically files cases with the public prosecutor against individuals for political statements, bans songs. I don't mean like Wehrmacht songs. I mean like pop songs, you know. So yeah, this Office for the Protection of the Constitution also deemed this parallel, saying that the German Federal Republic, so West Germany, which has now become the whole Germany, is reminiscent to the East Germany of the past. If you say that, that also goes against the constitution apparently. Constitution which actually Germany doesn't have. It has a basic law, not a constitution, just like Israel has and all of these provisional states have, because it was written by the Americans. It was written while Germany was occupied by the Americans, which it still is, and while it was just seen as a proxy of Western interests. So as it was the Austrian model could have been implemented for Germany. This was the Soviet proposal. Let's unite it into one country and have it neutral. And the Americans refused and said, okay, we would rather take our part because it's the bigger one and have it a member of NATO and militarize it and have it as a bulwark against the, well, satellite countries of the Soviet Union, because there was no Warsaw Pact yet. The Warsaw Pact came as a reaction to the formation of NATO as a so-called defensive alliance, but which had as purpose to basically conquer Eastern Europe and defeat communism, defeat the Soviet Union, and so forth. So yeah, I would say that the East German voters, first and foremost, are less brainwashed than their Western counterparts, just because the Western counterparts have been under the American heel for what's 80 years, and in these 80 years they have never listened to an alternative. Everything that was alternative was deemed pro-Soviet speech and so on, so it was banned before 1991. And after the Soviet Union lost the Cold War and communism collapsed, the same thing happened to Eastern Germany. Their elites were purged, and basically the conquerors from the West came in to establish the official discourse. So yeah, people who have memories of the German Democratic Republic, living under the German Democratic Republic regime, can see the resemblance of how official speech was back in the day and how it is now. So, and the second would be that just because they lived under the Russian occupation, they have a pretty good understanding of how Russians actually are, and because they had a lot of collaboration with the Russians, a lot of exchanges, and so on and so forth, they are they are not they are not permeable to this type of demonizing which happens in the Western propaganda, to say that the Russians are these savages, these barbarians, they're just a bunch of rapists and murderers, and they're just some hordes, brutal hordes, that if they're not stopped in Ukraine, they will go all the way to the Atlantic and they will pillage everything and they will rape everybody. It's kind of like the coming of the Huns or the coming of the Mongols, you know, the great Mongol conquering of Eastern and Central Europe of 1241. The Western propaganda machine utilizes this symbolism, this Asian symbolism, to depict, of course it's highly racist, and it is meant to depict the Russians as subhumans, as these orcs who are just inhuman and are willing to commit any kind of atrocities just for the fun of it, and so on and so forth. So yeah, it is an important tenet of the Western propaganda machine to picture Russians in this subhuman Muscovite Asian horde way, which is, of course, to the people in East Germany highly suspicious, because they also had quite a strong collaboration with the Russians in many respects, educational, scientific, cultural, and so on and so forth. And they actually know that things are not exactly like that, and they can smell bullshit, and they can smell rotten propaganda, and they can they can describe, they can decipher the matter through the lens of their own interest, as opposed to the Western Germans, who fall into this narrative, into this trap of seeing everything through some sort of moral ideology. We have to defeat Putin because he's the new Hitler. He's absolute evil incarnate, and anything that we do for peace would come under appeasement, and you cannot negotiate with Hitler, and so on and so forth. So the Western German, the Western Germans interiorized all this bullshit about absolute evil and how we should stop every dictator that America deems as such, because that's just another iteration of Hitler, just like we should have stopped Hitler and so on. So yeah, they fall into this moral trap because of the highly propagandized education that they had, and all this guilt complex that was put onto them. But the Eastern Germans are less susceptible to this kind of bullshit propaganda, and therefore they are able to look at things from a more realist perspective, to see the interests behind the war, to see how America is trying to defeat a geopolitical rival through a proxy that it funds, to see how the European Union is just a pawn that the United States utilizes in this war, and so on and so forth. So yeah, this is what I wanted to tell you about the results of the German state elections, which the whole Western media machine is running amok about. And until next time, you know what you should do if you like my videos: share them to somebody who might appreciate them. So that's it. Until next time, bye bye.